Victor Morelli grabbed the maid's wrist so hard, the bone almost cracked his eyes, burning with a fury that made 3 armed men flinch. "You dare touch me!" he snarled, blood still on his lips from the poison closing his throat. Evelyn didn't look away. She didn't beg. And in that frozen second, the most feared man in the city realized something that terrified him more than death itself. If you're watching this story right now, comment the name of your city below so I can see how far this story has traveled. Then hit subscribe and stay with me until the very end. Because what happens next will change how you see fear power and the people we walk past every single day. The rain came down like it was angry at the whole city, hammering against the windows of the Ashford Grand Hotel as if it wanted in. Evelyn Carter pulled her cart down the 22nd floor hallway, her sneakers squeaking against marble that cost more per square foot than she made in a year. Her back ached. Her eyes stung from exhaustion. She had been awake for 19 hours, and in 6 more she would be back here again, because rent didn't care how tired she was, and neither did the hospital bills stacking up in a drawer she couldn't bring herself to open anymore. She stopped in front of room 604 and stared at the closed door like it was a mouth that might swallow her whole. Nobody cleaned 604. Nobody was allowed to. It belonged to a man whose name hotel staff only whispered, never said out loud in full sentences, as if saying it too clearly might summon him. Victor Morelli. Her supervisor, a tired woman named Rosa, had grabbed her arm 20 minutes earlier in the staff hallway, her face pale. "Evelyn, I need you to do 604. Evelyn blinked. 604, I thought nobody. His usual girl called in sick. Everyone else refused. Rosa's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I wouldn't ask if I had a choice. 15 minutes, in and out. Don't touch anything that isn't yours to touch. Don't look at anything too long. Don't ask questions if you see something strange. You understand? Evelyn's stomach twisted into a hard knot. Rosa, I have a shift ending in an hour. My brother's fever was... Evelyn. Rosa's eyes were pleading now, not commanding. Please, I need this floor cleaned tonight or Mr. Bianchi will have both our heads. 15 minutes. That's all I'm asking. She thought about her brother Daniel, 17 years old, lying in a hospital bed 3 miles away with a heart that beat too fast and too weak. At the same time, a heart that doctors said needed a surgery their family could never afford. She thought about the envelope of cash in her drawer that was still $4,000 short. She thought about how every extra shift, every extra minute of overtime mattered. Fine, she said. 15 minutes. Now standing in front of the door, her master key trembling slightly in her hand, she almost turned around. Almost. But Rent didn't care about almost. She knocked twice, waited, heard nothing, and let herself in. The suite was dark except for the glow of the city bleeding through floor-to-ceiling windows, rain streaking down the glass in long silver lines. The air smelled like expensive whiskey, and something metallic underneath it that she couldn't place yet. She flipped on the hallway light and called out softly the way she'd been trained to. Housekeeping. Hello. Silence. She pushed her cart in, grabbed a cloth, and started toward the side table stacked with empty glasses, telling herself this was just another room, just another job, 15 minutes and she'd be gone. Then she heard it. A wet, choking gasp from the sitting area near the window. Evelyn froze cloth still in her hand. Hello? Is someone... Another gasp, sharper this time, followed by the sound of a glass shattering against hardwood. She turned the corner, and her whole body went cold. A man was slumped in the leather armchair, one hand clawing weakly at his own throat, his face turning a shade of purple-gray that no living person's face should turn. His lips were moving, but no sound came out except a thin, horrible wheeze. His eyes, wide, terrified human, locked onto hers. This was him. This was Victor Morelli, the man whose name made grown security guards lower their voices. And he was dying in front of her, 12 feet away, completely alone. For one paralyzing second, every instinct in Evelyn's body screamed at her to run, turn around, walk out, pretend she saw nothing. This was not her problem. This was not her world. Whatever was happening to this man was mafia business, dangerous business, the kind of business that got regular people killed just for standing too close. But then his hand fell limp against the armrest, and his eyes started to roll back, and something in Evelyn, the same, something that had kept her awake 3 nights straight when Daniel's fever spiked, the same something that made her run into traffic once to grab a stranger's toddler off the road, took over completely. She dropped the cloth and ran. "Sir, sir, can you hear me? Hear me?" He couldn't answer. His chest was seizing, fighting for air that wouldn't come. Evelyn had taken exactly 1 first aid course 2 years ago, mandatory for the hotel job, and she had barely passed it. But one phrase from that class exploded into her mind with terrifying clarity. Airway obstruction, chest thrusts, act now or he dies in front of you. She grabbed his shoulders, tilted him forward, and without thinking, without permission, without a single ounce of hesitation, she balled her fist and slammed it into his sternum with everything her exhausted body had left. Nothing happened. "Come on," she whispered, voice shaking. "Come on, come on." She hit him again harder, screaming the words in her own head. "Don't you dare die. Don't you dare die on me and on the 3rd strike." Something shifted inside his chest. His whole body convulsed, and he coughed a violent, guttural, tearing cough, and something small and wet flew from his mouth onto the carpet. He gasped in a huge, ragged breath of air, then another, his hands flying to his throat, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. Evelyn stumbled back 2 steps, her chest heaving, adrenaline crashing through her like electricity. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Oh my God, can you breathe?" Victor Morelli did not answer her. He looked at her instead, his dark eyes locking onto her face with an intensity that made every hair on her arms stand up. He was still gasping, still recovering, one hand braced against the arm of the chair, but his eyes were sharp now, calculating, studying her, like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to find in his own hotel room. "Who," he rasped, voice raw and broken, "are you?" Before Evelyn could answer, the suite door burst open with a violent crash. 3 men rushed in, guns already drawn, eyes sweeping the room in half a second before landing on the scene in front of them, their boss slumped and gasping in a chair, a maid standing over him, a shattered glass on the floor, something wet and unidentifiable on the carpet. "Boss!" the tallest one shouted, and then his gun swung directly at Evelyn's head. "Don't move, don't you move. Don't you!" Evelyn's whole body locked in terror, her hands instinctively rising into the air. Wait, I didn't. I was just cleaning. I found him like this, I swear." "Shut up," the second man barked, stepping closer, gun steady. "You poisoned him. You poisoned Mr. Morelli." No, I didn't do anything. I just walked in and he was choking. I was trying to help him. On your knees now." Evelyn's legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand, let alone kneel, but she started to lower herself, tears burning in her eyes, her mind screaming, Daniel, what happens to Daniel if I die here tonight? Wait!" The voice was hoarse, weak, but it cut through the room like a blade. Everyone froze. Victor was pushing himself upright in the chair, one hand still pressed to his chest, his breathing ragged but steadying. His eyes hadn't left Evelyn's face this entire time. "Boss, are you what happened? Who did this?" "I said wait." Victor rasped louder this time, and the gunman's arm dropped an inch uncertain. Victor studied Evelyn for a long, unbearable moment. She was on her knees, hands raised, tears streaking down her face, her uniform wrinkled and stained from a 19-hour shift, her whole body trembling, not with guile, not with the calculated calm of a professional killer, but with raw, unfiltered human terror. "She didn't poison me," Victor said slowly. "Boss, we don't know that she was standing right over you." "I said she didn't poison me." Victor's voice cracked like a whip, and the room went silent instantly. He took a shaky breath, wincing, then continued quieter now. "A poisoner doesn't scream for help. A poisoner doesn't punch a dying man in the chest trying to save him. A poisoner runs." His eyes narrowed slightly, still fixed on her. "She didn't run." The tallest gunman lowered his weapon, slightly confused. "Then what happened to you?" Victor's jaw tightened, and something dark and dangerous moved behind his eyes, something that had nothing to do with Evelyn at all. "Someone in this hotel," he said quietly, "put something in my drink tonight, And whoever it was expected me to die alone in this room with no one around to see it happen. The words hung in the air like smoke. Except... Victor continued, his gaze finally shifting away from Evelyn to sweep across his men. Someone was around. A maid nobody assigned to this floor. A maid who had no reason, no motive, and no way of knowing what she was about to walk into. His eyes returned to her, sharper, now colder, calculating in a way that made Evelyn's stomach drop even further than the gun had. That's either the worst luck a woman has ever had in her life, or it's the reason I'm still breathing. Sir. Evelyn managed, her voice shaking so hard the word barely came out whole. I swear to you, I was just told to clean the room. I didn't know anyone was in here. I didn't know who you were. I heard you choking and I couldn't just leave you there. Why not? The question stopped her cold. What? Why not? Victor repeated, leaning forward slightly despite the obvious pain it caused him. You didn't know me. You had no reason to help me. Half this city would have loved to watch me die tonight and done nothing but smile. So tell me, why didn't you just walk out that door and pretend you saw nothing? Evelyn stared at him, at this man whose reputation alone made grown men's hands shake, and for a moment she forgot to be afraid of the guns still half raised around the room. She thought of Daniel's face pale against hospital sheets, and something honest and exhausted rose up in her chest before she could stop it. Because, she said quietly, nobody deserves to die alone like that, not even if everyone else thinks you do. Silence swallowed the room. Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, something unreadable, something that looked almost like disbelief. One of the gunmen finally broke the silence. Boss, what do we do with her? Victor didn't answer right away. He was still looking at Evelyn, studying her the way a man studies a language he doesn't understand, but suddenly desperately wants to learn. Get Dr. Holloway up here immediately. He finally said, his voice regaining some of its former authority. And get someone to test whatever's left in that glass on the floor before the maid staff clears it. I want to know exactly what was used tonight, and I want to know in the next hour. And her, the tallest man asked, gesturing at Evelyn with his chin, though the gun had finally lowered fully to his side. Victor's eyes didn't leave Evelyn's face. She stays, he said. Evelyn's heart dropped through the floor. Wait, what? No, I need to go, my brother. I have to. You will be compensated for your time, Victor said, cutting her off with a tone that left absolutely no room for argument, the kind of tone that men in this business used right before someone disappeared and was never mentioned again. And you will not be harmed, but you are not leaving this hotel tonight, Miss... He paused, waiting. Carter, she whispered. Evelyn Carter. Miss Carter. Victor repeated her name slowly, like he was memorizing it, filing it away somewhere it would never be forgotten. You just watched someone try to kill me in my own hotel room. That makes you one of exactly 2 people alive tonight who knows I was weak enough to almost die like an animal choking on my own blood. His eyes darkened. Do you understand what that makes you to the people who did this? Evelyn's mouth went dry. A witness, she whispered. A target, Victor corrected. The moment you walk out of this hotel, whoever poisoned me will assume you saw something, heard something, know something, and they will not ask you politely to keep quiet. The room seemed to shrink around her. Evelyn felt the walls of her entire, simple, exhausting, invisible life collapsing inward, replaced by something enormous and terrifying that she had never asked to be part of. So what happens to me now? She asked, voice barely audible. Victor rose slowly from the chair, still unsteady, one hand braced against the armrest, but his eyes never once left hers, burning now with something that was no longer confusion, but decision. Now, he said, you're under my protection. I didn't ask for your protection. No. Victor agreed, a ghost of something almost like respect crossing his face. You didn't ask for any of this. You just saved the life of a man half this city wants dead, using nothing but your bare hands and more courage than most of the armed men standing in this room tonight. He took a slow breath, wincing again at the pain still lingering in his chest. That kind of debt doesn't just disappear because you'd rather forget it happened. And if I refuse? Evelyn asked, some last flicker of defiance rising through her fear. If I just want to go home and pretend I never walked into this room? Victor's expression turned almost gentle, almost sad in a way that terrified her more than his anger ever could. "Then you'd be dead within the week," he said simply. "And I would spend the rest of my life knowing the one person who saved me died because I let her walk out that door alone." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Before she could respond, the suite doors opened again, this time slower, more controlled, and a man in a dark gray suit stepped inside, his eyes immediately sweeping the scene with cold, practiced calculation. He was younger than Victor Sharper, somehow his expression carved from something colder than concern. "Victor," the man said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I heard what happened. Are you all right?" Victor's whole demeanor shifted the instant this new man entered his shoulders, squaring his jaw, tightening something guarded, sliding down over his face like a mask. "I'm fine, Stefano," Victor said, though his tone made it clear the conversation was far from over. Stefano's eyes moved to Evelyn, kneeling still on the floor, and something calculating flickered across his face before he smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes at all. "And who is this?" "The reason I'm still alive," Victor said flatly. Stefano's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, so brief Evelyn almost missed it before it smoothed back into practiced charm. "How fortunate," he said softly, "that a maid happened to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time." The words were polite. The tone was not. Evelyn felt a chill crawl up her spine that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly at his cousin, something unspoken passing between the two men that Evelyn couldn't read, but instinctively understood was dangerous. "Fortunate indeed," Victor said quietly, never breaking eye contact with Stefano. "Have someone prepare a room for Ms. Carter in the east wing of the estate. She'll be staying with us for a while." Stefano's expression flickered again, sharper this time, unmistakable this time. "The estate, Victor, don't you think that's a bit—" "I wasn't asking your opinion," Victor said, his voice suddenly cold enough to freeze the entire room. "I was informing you of a decision." For a moment, the two men stared at each other, and Evelyn felt like she was watching the surface of something enormous and dangerous, something that had nothing to do with her, and yet somehow now had everything to do with her survival. Stefano finally smiled again, that same cold, practiced smile. "Of course, whatever you think is best." His eyes flicked to Evelyn one last time, something calculating and patient behind them, before he turned and walked out of the room without another word. The moment the door closed behind him, Evelyn realized her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Victor exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders now that his cousin was gone, though his eyes remained sharp, alert, calculating. "You should be careful around him," Evelyn found herself saying before she could stop the words. Victor's eyes snapped back to her, surprised. "Excuse me, Stefano," Evelyn said quietly, her heart pounding at her own boldness. "He didn't look happy that you're alive. He looked disappointed." The room went utterly silent. Victor stared at her for a long moment, something dark and thoughtful crossing his face before he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You noticed that in less than 30 seconds. I've spent my whole life reading people who don't want to be read," Evelyn said, and for the first time since walking into this nightmare, her voice didn't shake at all. "Rich guests, angry managers, doctors who don't want to tell you bad news to your face. You learn to see what people are hiding even when they're smiling." Something shifted in Victor's expression, respect, calculation, and something else entirely. Something Evelyn couldn't name but felt in the pit of her stomach like a warning. "What else do you see, Ms. Carter?" he asked quietly. Evelyn hesitated, glancing at the two remaining gunmen still standing guard by the door, then back at Victor. "I see a man," she said slowly, "who almost died tonight in a room by himself, surrounded by people who are supposed to protect him. And I see a man who's more afraid of the person who did this being close to him than he is of dying." Victor's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. "You should go home to your brother," he finally said, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. "I know that's what you're thinking about right now." Evelyn's breath caught. "How do you—" "You mentioned him, just now without realizing it. You said, if I die here tonight, what happens to Daniel?" Victor's eyes softened slightly. "You said his name out loud when you thought no one was paying attention." Evelyn's throat tightened painfully. "He's sick," she whispered. "His heart. He needs surgery we can't afford, and I've been picking up every extra shift I can just to—" She stopped herself, embarrassed, angry at herself for revealing so much to a man who 20 minutes ago she'd been terrified would have her killed. Victor was quiet for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his dark eyes. "Dr. Holloway is the best cardiac specialist in 3 states, he said finally. "He owes me a debt he's been trying to repay for 6 years. Evelyn's head snapped up. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Victor said, his voice low and steady, "that your brother will have his surgery, immediately, paid in full." Evelyn stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Why would you— I don't understand, why would you do that for me?" Victor's eyes met hers, and for just a moment, the mask of cold calculation slipped away entirely, revealing something raw and human underneath, something exhausted, something almost afraid. "Because you punched a dying man in the chest to save his life," Victor said quietly, "when every instinct in your body was screaming at you to run. I've spent 31 years surrounded by men who would let me die and step over my body to take my chair. Tonight, a stranger who owed me nothing decided I was worth saving." His voice dropped even lower. "That's not a debt I can repay with money, Ms. Carter, but I intend to try anyway." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears she hadn't realized were building exhaustion and fear and disbelief crashing over her all at once. "I still don't know if I should be grateful," she whispered, "or terrified." Something that might have almost been a smile, small, tired, and genuinely human, flickered at the corner of Victor's mouth. "Welcome to my world, Ms. Carter," he said quietly. "Most people who know me eventually feel both." Outside the windows, the storm hadn't stopped. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger, thunder rolling somewhere over the city, like a warning of things still to come. Evelyn looked down at her trembling hands, the same hands that less than an hour ago had been scrubbing toilets and changing sheets in complete anonymity, and realized, with a fear that settled deep into her bones, that the invisible life she had spent 26 years living quietly, exhaustedly, and unnoticed had just ended forever. She had walked into room 604 as nobody. She was walking out of it as the one person Victor Morelli trusted least to lose. And somewhere in that mansion she was about to enter, someone had already tried to kill him once tonight, and now, because of what she'd witnessed, because of what she now knew, that same someone had every reason in the world to make sure Evelyn Carter never got the chance to speak about it at all. Rain still hammered the windows of the Morelli estate when the black car pulled through the iron gates just after 2 in the morning, and Evelyn sat frozen in the back seat. Her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Beside her, Victor said nothing, his eyes fixed on the darkened grounds passing outside, his breathing still slightly uneven from whatever poison had nearly stopped his heart less than 2 hours earlier. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in that hotel room, and yet everything about the silence between them felt heavier than words ever could. The car stopped in front of a mansion so large it looked like it belonged to a different century, and before Evelyn could process the sheer size of it, a woman in a dark uniform was already opening the car door, waiting. "This is Marta," Victor said quietly, stepping out first, offering no hand to help her, though Evelyn hadn't expected one. "She runs the household. She'll show you to your room." "My room," Evelyn repeated numbly, following him out into the cold night air. "Victor, I have a shift at 7 a.m. I have a life. You have a target on your back." Victor cut in, his voice low enough that only she could hear it. "That life you're talking about doesn't exist the way it did 4 hours ago. I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you otherwise." Evelyn opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat when she saw his face. Not cold, not commanding, just tired. Genuinely bone-deep tired, the way she recognized from her own reflection most mornings. "My brother," she said instead, quieter now. "You said Dr. Holloway is already at the hospital," Victor said. "I called him from the car. Your brother will be prepped for surgery by morning. You'll be able to see him the moment he's out." Something in Evelyn's chest cracked open, relief and disbelief crashing into each other so hard she had to blink back sudden tears. "You actually did it. You weren't just saying that to—" I don't say things I don't mean, Victor said simply. It's a bad habit in my line of work. People expect lies. I found the truth unsettles them more. Before Evelyn could respond, a voice cut through the cold air from the top of the marble steps, smooth and deliberately casual. Well, well, the maid moves up in the world. Evelyn's stomach tightened instantly. Stefano stood in the doorway, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his expression unreadable in the dim light spilling out behind him. He'd beaten them here somehow, already comfortable, already watching. "Stefano," Victor said flatly, not slowing his pace up the steps. "Shouldn't you be arranging security for the floor where you found me half dead?" "Already handled," Stefano said smoothly, though something flickered behind his eyes at the pointed tone. "I've had the room sealed. Forensics will go through it at dawn." His gaze slid to Evelyn, lingering a moment too long. "And I've taken the liberty of informing the family you'll be staying with us, Ms. Carter. Everyone's very curious to meet the woman who saved Victor's life." The way he said it, curious, made the hair on the back of Evelyn's neck rise. "I'm sure they are," Victor said, an edge creeping into his voice now. "Make sure curiosity is all it stays." Stefano smiled, raised his glass slightly in mock toast, and stepped aside to let them pass. But Evelyn felt his eyes on her back the entire way through the door, and she understood with a clarity that terrified her that whatever war was quietly happening inside this family, she had just become a piece on the board without ever agreeing to play. Marta led her up a wide staircase and down a hallway lined with paintings that probably cost more than the hospital bill she'd been drowning in for months, finally stopping at a door near the end of the corridor. "You'll stay here," Marta said, her voice neutral, professional, giving nothing away. "Mr. Morelli asked that you have anything you need, clothes, food, whatever it is." "I don't need clothes," Evelyn said, exhaustion finally cracking through the adrenaline. "I need to know I'm not going to get shot in my sleep." Marta's expression softened just slightly, the first crack of humanity Evelyn had seen since arriving. "No one touches anyone under Mr. Morelli's protection," she said quietly, not without answering to him directly. "And believe me, dear, nobody in this house wants to answer to him directly right now." That should have been comforting. It wasn't. Evelyn barely slept that night. She lay on top of sheets softer than anything she'd ever touched, staring at a ceiling in a house she didn't belong in, replaying the sound of Victor choking over and over, the wet gasp, the feel of her fist against his chest, the moment his eyes had locked onto hers, like she was the only solid thing left in the world. By the time gray morning light crept through the curtains, she hadn't closed her eyes once. At 6:30, there was a knock at her door. It was Victor himself, dressed, composed, no trace of the previous night's collapse, visible except a faint tightness around his eyes. "Dr. Holloway just called," he said without preamble. "Your brother's surgery went well. He's stable, recovering." Evelyn's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Can I see him?" "This afternoon," Victor said. "I'll have a car take you. Marta will accompany you." "Marta," Evelyn repeated. "Not you." Something flickered across Victor's face. Hesitation maybe, or calculation. "I have matters to handle here," he said. "Someone tried to kill me last night, Ms. Carter. I intend to find out who before they try again." "And where do I fit into that?" Evelyn asked, some of last night's fear hardening into something sharper, something closer to frustration. "You said I was a target. You said staying here would protect me. But if you're hunting whoever did this, doesn't that make this house the most dangerous place I could possibly be?" Victor studied her for a long moment, and Evelyn had the unsettling sense that he was recalculating something, adjusting an equation in real time. "I want to offer you a position," he said finally. "A position." "My personal food taster," Victor said. "Officially, publicly, everyone in this house will know that you, and only you, prepare and test everything I consume from this point forward." Evelyn stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You want me to risk being poisoned in your place?" "I want you visible," Victor corrected. "Right now, you're a loose thread, a maid who saw something she shouldn't have, easy to eliminate quietly without anyone asking questions. But if you're standing beside me, publicly protected by title, watched by everyone in this house, who already knows what happens to people who cross me, you become far harder to remove without consequences. It protects you exactly as much as it protects me." That's insane, Evelyn breathed. You're asking me to willingly put food that might be poisoned into my own mouth. I'm asking you to trust that I will not let that happen, Victor said quietly. Every dish will be tested for toxins before it reaches you. You will taste in controlled portions monitored constantly. The position exists as much for appearance as function. But I won't lie to you, there is risk. I would never insult you by pretending otherwise. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on her chest. And if I say no, then I'll have you moved somewhere safe, far from the city, with a new identity and enough money that you and your brother never have to worry about hospital bills again, Victor said. You'd be free, untouched by any of this. For a moment, hope flickered fiercely in Evelyn's chest. An exit, a way out, a return to the quiet, invisible, exhausting life she'd known before. But then she thought of Stefano's cold, calculating eyes on the staircase. She thought of the way he'd smiled, like he already knew something Victor didn't. If I disappear, she said slowly, whoever poisoned you last night gets away with it, and you're still in danger, aren't you? Victor didn't answer immediately, and his silence was answer enough. I'll stay, Evelyn said before she could second-guess herself. I'll do it. The tasting. All of it. Something shifted in Victor's expression, surprise maybe, or something closer to gratitude he clearly wasn't used to expressing. You understand what you're agreeing to. I understand that a man almost died in front of me last night, and I couldn't just walk away and pretend I never saw it, Evelyn said, echoing her own words from hours earlier, feeling their truth settle even deeper this time. I don't know why. Maybe I'm an idiot. But I'm staying. Victor nodded once, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Then get dressed. I want to introduce you to the family before breakfast. Better they hear the truth from me than rumors from Stefano. The family, as it turned out, was smaller and colder than Evelyn had imagined. Around a dining table long enough to seat 20 sat only 5 people. Victor at the head, an older woman with silver hair and sharp assessing eyes, who turned out to be Victor's Aunt Isabella, a heavy-set man named Dominic, who barely looked up from his phone, a younger woman, Sophia, who eyed Evelyn with open curiosity rather than hostility, and Stefano seated close to Victor's right hand, watching everything with the patient stillness of a man used to waiting. This is Evelyn Carter, Victor announced, no hesitation in his voice. As most of you already know, she saved my life last night. From this point forward, she'll be staying with us, serving as my personal food taster. Silence fell over the table like a dropped blade. Your food taster, Isabella repeated slowly, her sharp eyes sliding over Evelyn with clinical precision. A hotel maid. A hotel maid who noticed I was dying when 3 armed men standing outside my door noticed nothing at all, Victor said evenly, and the barb landed exactly where he intended. Isabella's jaw tightened, and Dominic finally looked up from his phone with something like alarm. We're not questioning your judgment, Victor, Stefano said smoothly, though his tone suggested the exact opposite. We're simply concerned. Bringing an outsider so deep into the family's affairs so quickly without vetting— I vetted her myself, Victor said, with my own life. She passed. Sophia laughed softly at that, earning a sharp look from Isabella that she ignored entirely. I like her already, Sophia said, turning to Evelyn with something almost warm in her expression. Anyone who survives a first night in this house without running screaming has my respect. Sophia, Isabella warned, what, I'm just being honest. Sophia shrugged, unbothered. Breakfast proceeded in stilted, uncomfortable silence. After that, every dish passing first through Evelyn's hands, every bite of Victor's food tasted and monitored under Isabella's watchful, disapproving eyes. Evelyn felt the weight of the entire table's scrutiny, with every swallow waiting for her throat to close, for her vision to blur. For the moment, poison finally found its way to her instead. It never came. But the tension never left either. It was Marta who drove her to the hospital that afternoon, and the moment Evelyn walked into Daniel's recovery room and saw him sitting up pale but breathing easily, color slowly returning to his cheeks, she broke down entirely, sobbing into his shoulder while he laughed weakly and told her to stop crying on his stitches. They said some rich guy paid for everything, Daniel said, still groggy from anesthesia, his voice hoarse but alive, gloriously, impossibly alive. Evie, what happened? Who? "It's a long story," Evelyn whispered, holding him tighter. "I'll explain everything, I promise. Just you're okay. You're actually okay." "You're shaking," Daniel said, pulling back slightly to study her face with the same sharp instincts she'd always had, the ones that used to catch her hiding bad grades or late rent notices when they were kids. "Evie, what happened to you?" She almost told him everything right there. The poison, the gun to her head, the mansion, the impossible bargain she'd made with a man half the city feared. But looking at his exhausted, hopeful face, freshly saved from death himself, she couldn't bring herself to add that weight onto him. "I got a new job," she said instead, forcing a smile through her tears. "A really, really good one." Daniel studied her for a long moment, clearly not fully convinced but too tired to push. "Okay," he said finally, "as long as you're safe." The word safe echoed uncomfortably in Evelyn's chest, the entire ride back to the estate. She returned just past sunset to find the mansion humming with a different kind of tension. Hushed voices, hurried footsteps, an unmistakable current of fear running beneath the surface of everything. Marta ushered her quickly through the side entrance instead of the main hall. "What's happening?" Evelyn asked. "The lab results came back," Marta said quietly, "from the glass in the hotel room." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "And?" Marta hesitated, glancing around before answering. "The poison wasn't something bought on any street corner, dear. It was something rare, something expensive, something only a handful of people in this world would even know how to acquire." Her eyes met Evelyn's, grave and unmistakable. "Mr. Morelli is meeting with his men right now. He's certain now more than ever whoever did this wasn't an outsider." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "You mean it was someone in this house?" Marta said nothing, which was answer enough. Evelyn found Victor an hour later in a private study on the mansion's second floor, standing alone by the window, a folder open on the desk behind him, his shoulders rigid with barely controlled fury. "You wanted to see me?" she asked quietly from the doorway. Victor turned, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like fear. Not for himself, she realized, but for what he already suspected and dreaded confirming. "Sit down, Ms. Carter," he said. "There's something you need to know, and I think you're the only person in this house I can trust to hear it without an agenda." Evelyn sat slowly, her heart pounding. "What is it?" Victor picked up the folder from his desk and set it in front of her, his jaw tight. "The poison used last night," he said, "is called thallium acetate. Odorless, tasteless, nearly impossible to detect without specific lab testing, which is precisely why whoever used it chose it." He paused, watching her face carefully. "It's also incredibly difficult to acquire. There are perhaps a dozen suppliers in the entire country capable of sourcing it in a usable form. My people have already confirmed contact with 3 of them." "And?" Evelyn asked, though something in her chest already knew the answer wasn't going to be simple. "One of those suppliers," Victor said quietly, "has done business with this family before, 6 years ago, through an account traced back to someone still living under this roof." Evelyn's breath caught. "Who?" Victor's eyes darkened, and for a long, heavy moment he said nothing at all, staring instead at the folder like it contained something he desperately didn't want to be true. "I don't know yet," he admitted finally. "The account was cleared out and closed years ago, the trail deliberately buried. Whoever did this was patient. Careful. They planned this for a very long time, Miss Carter, which means whoever it is has been sitting across from me at that dinner table, smiling in my face for years." The weight of his words settled over Evelyn like ice water. "Stefano," she whispered before she could stop herself. Victor's expression didn't confirm it, but it didn't deny it either. "I have no proof," he said carefully. "And accusing him without proof in this family and this business, it could tear everything apart faster than any poison ever could. I need evidence, undeniable evidence." "Then let me help find it," Evelyn said, suddenly surprising even herself with the certainty in her voice. Victor's eyes snapped to hers, sharp with surprise. "Absolutely not." "Why not? I'm already involved. I'm already a target. If Stefano or whoever it is thinks I know something, they're going to come after me eventually, whether I'm digging for answers or hiding in my room pretending none of this is happening." Evelyn leaned forward, some fierce protective instinct rising in her chest, the same one that had driven her fists into his chest the night before. Let me actually be useful instead of just being bait. For a long moment, Victor studied her. Something complicated moving behind his dark eyes. Respect warning. And something else Evelyn couldn't quite name, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "You have no idea what you're offering to walk into," he said quietly. "Then explain it to me," Evelyn said. "Because from where I'm sitting, I already walked into the middle of it the moment I opened that hotel room door. I'd rather walk in with my eyes open than get pulled under blind." Something that might have almost been a smile tugged at the corner of Victor's mouth, small, tired, but genuine. "You're either the bravest person I've met in 20 years, he said, "or the most reckless." "Can't it be both?" Evelyn asked. This time he actually laughed, a short, surprised sound quickly stifled like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. "Fine," he said finally. "You'll help, quietly, carefully. You'll report anything strange directly to me and no one else. Do you understand? No one else, Evelyn. Not Marta, not Sophia, not anyone." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and something about the way it landed in the space between them made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Understood," she said softly. Over the following days, Evelyn settled into a strange, uneasy rhythm inside the mansion, tasting every dish before it reached Victor's table, watching every face at dinner with newly sharpened attention, cataloging every small detail, who avoided eye contact, who watched Victor a little too closely, who seemed relieved he was alive, and who seemed to be merely performing relief for an audience. Stefano, she noticed almost immediately, never once let his guard slip in front of others. But late one evening, passing his study on her way to the kitchen, she overheard him on the phone, his voice low and clipped, in a way she'd never heard him use at the dinner table. "The timeline moved up, I told you that already," he was saying, tension threading through every word. "No, he's still alive, which means we don't have the luxury of waiting anymore." Evelyn froze in the hallway, her heart slamming against her ribs. "If it happens again, it needs to actually work this time," Stefano continued, his voice dropping even lower. "I don't care what it costs. I want this finished before the gala next week." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She backed away from the door slowly, silently, before turning and half running down the hallway toward Victor's study, her mind racing through everything she'd just heard. This time, it needs to actually work. Before the gala next week. She found Victor at his desk reviewing documents, and the moment he saw her face, he was on his feet instantly. "What happened?" "Stefano," Evelyn gasped, still catching her breath. "I just heard him on the phone. He said—" She stopped, forcing herself to steady her voice to remember his exact words. "He said something about a timeline moving up. He said if it happens again, it needs to actually work this time. And he mentioned the gala. Next week." Victor's face went utterly still, the color draining from it, in a way that frightened Evelyn more than any of his previous anger had. "Are you certain of his exact words?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Word for word," Evelyn said. "Victor, I think he's planning something at the gala, something bigger than what happened at the hotel." Victor was silent for a long, terrible moment, staring at nothing, his jaw working like he was fighting to keep something enormous contained beneath the surface. "The gala," he said finally, "is being hosted by 3 rival families. Every major player in this city's underworld will be under one roof. If something happens to me there, it won't just be your problem." Evelyn finished quietly, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. "It'll look like a declaration of war. Someone could frame it as one family attacking another." "Exactly," Victor said grimly, "which means whoever's behind this isn't just trying to eliminate me. They're trying to eliminate me in a way that starts a war convenient enough to hide behind." Evelyn's mind raced, pieces clicking together with terrifying speed. "Stefano wouldn't just be killing you," she said slowly. "He'd be starting a war he could then step in and end, making himself the hero who unites everyone against a common enemy, making himself the new head of a much larger empire." Victor finished, his voice hollow, with the horror of finally seeing the full shape of the trap being laid for him. "God help me. I've been so focused on who poisoned my drink, I never stopped to ask what they were actually building toward. He turned to Evelyn, suddenly something fierce and urgent burning in his eyes. You cannot repeat what you just told me to anyone. Not Marta, not Sophia, not anyone in this house. Do you understand? If Stefano learns you overheard him... I know, Evelyn said quietly. I know what happens to people who know too much. I learned that lesson the night I walked into your hotel room. Victor's expression softened just slightly, something almost apologetic passing behind his eyes. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I ever let you get pulled into this. You didn't pull me into anything, Evelyn said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. I walked in myself, and I'm not sorry I did even now, even knowing everything I know. She met his eyes steadily. So don't apologize to me like I'm a victim in this, Victor. Let me help you stop it instead. Something shifted in the air between them. Something neither of them acknowledged out loud, but both of them felt a fragile, dangerous thread of trust forming between a mafia boss who had learned to expect betrayal from everyone around him, and a maid who had walked willingly into the fire simply because she couldn't stand to watch someone die alone. Then we prepare, Victor said, finally, his voice regaining its steel. Quietly, carefully. If Stefano thinks he's still one step ahead of us, let him keep thinking that right up until the moment he isn't. Evelyn nodded. Adrenaline and fear tangled tightly together in her chest, and for just a moment, standing there in the dim light of his study, she allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to hope, that maybe together they could survive whatever was coming. But even as that fragile hope took root, Evelyn couldn't shake the memory of Stefano's cold, patient eyes on the staircase that very first night, the way he'd looked at her like a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be feared. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet, unshakable voice reminded her that the most dangerous people in any room were rarely the ones holding the gun. They were the ones smiling calmly while they waited for exactly the right moment to pull the trigger. The days leading up to the gala moved faster than Evelyn's nerves could keep pace with, and every hour inside that mansion felt like walking across glass. She couldn't see, waiting for the moment it finally cracked beneath her feet. Victor called a meeting with his most trusted men 2 mornings after Evelyn overheard Stefano's phone call, and he insisted she be in the room despite the visible discomfort on several of the men's faces at having an outsider present for family business this sensitive. She stays, Victor said flatly, when one of the older men, a broad-shouldered enforcer named Reyes, questioned it. She's the reason any of us are having this conversation at all. If she hadn't heard what she heard, we'd be walking into that gala blind. Reyes didn't argue further, but his eyes lingered on Evelyn with a wary uncertainty that she was beginning to recognize as the default reaction of everyone in Victor's world towards someone who didn't belong in it. Here's what we know, Victor continued, spreading a folder across the table. The gala is being hosted by the Castellano and Rossi families along with us, as a show of unity between the 3 largest operations in the city. Every major player will be there, every rival, every ally, every person with a reason to want any one of the 3 heads of family dead. And you think Stefano's planning to use that as cover, Reyes said slowly, understanding dawning across his weathered face. I think, Victor said grimly, that if something happens to me in a room full of rival families, it won't look like an internal betrayal. It'll look like an assassination attempt from outside, which means retaliation, which means war. And whoever survives that war standing closest to the throne inherits everything, finished a younger man near the end of the table, his voice tight with the realization. Victor nodded once. Which is exactly why we cannot move against Stefano without absolute proof. If I accuse him publicly and I'm wrong, or if I can't prove it beyond doubt, I don't just lose a cousin. I fracture this entire family in front of every rival watching for exactly that kind of weakness. So what do we do? Evelyn asked quietly, the first time she'd spoken since the meeting began, and every head in the room turned toward her. Some curious, some clearly annoyed at her audacity to speak at all. Victor's eyes met hers steady, and something about the way he looked at her, like her question mattered more than the skepticism radiating from every other person at the table, made the room's tension shift just slightly. We watch, Victor said. We wait. We let him believe his plan is moving forward exactly as he intends, right up until the moment we take away his ability to execute it. And how do we do that without him noticing? Reyes asked. Victor's eyes flicked back to Evelyn, and something in his expression made her stomach tighten with sudden understanding. "Ms. Carter has access no one else in this room has," Victor said slowly. "She's new. She's beneath suspicion in Stefano's eyes, at least, because to him she's nothing more than a maid playing dress-up as a food taster. He underestimates her completely." "You want me to spy on him?" Evelyn said, her voice flat with disbelief. "I want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing," Victor corrected. "Watching, listening, noticing things the rest of us are too close to see." His voice softened just barely enough that only she seemed to catch it. "You have good instincts, Evelyn. Better than anyone else at this table right now, myself included. I'd be a fool not to use that." The compliment landed somewhere unexpected in her chest, warm and unfamiliar, and she pushed the feeling down before it could distract her from the danger sitting directly across the table in the form of every widened, doubtful eye still fixed on her. 2 nights before the gala, Evelyn found herself unable to sleep again, wandering the mansion's darkened halls with a cup of tea she didn't really want, just to have something to hold on to. She turned a corner near the East Wing library and stopped short at the sight of Sophia sitting alone in the dim light, a bottle of wine mostly empty on the table beside her. "Can't sleep either?" Sophia asked without looking up, her voice slightly slurred at the edges. "Not really," Evelyn admitted, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. "Sit!" Sophia said, gesturing loosely to the chair across from her. "God knows I could use someone to talk to who isn't terrified of saying the wrong thing in front of Isabella." Evelyn hesitated, then sat some instinct telling her this conversation might matter more than she realized. "Everyone in this house is so careful all the time," Sophia continued, swirling her wineglass slowly. "Careful what they say, careful who's listening, careful who they trust." She looked up, finally her eyes sharper than the wine suggested they should be. "You're not careful at all. It's honestly refreshing." "I'm terrified constantly," Evelyn said honestly. "I just don't have the luxury of hiding it well." Sophia laughed softly, genuinely, and for a moment the mansion's suffocating tension seemed to lift just slightly. "You know," she said, her voice quieter now, "Stefano used to be different, before his father died. Before Victor's father chose Victor to inherit everything instead of him." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, chose Victor instead of him?" Sophia's expression flickered, some old buried grief surfacing briefly. Stefano's father and Victor's father were brothers, co-founders essentially of everything this family built. When the old man died, everyone assumed leadership would split evenly, or maybe even go to Stefano since he was older. She took a slow sip of wine. "But Victor's father chose Victor, said Stefano was too impulsive, too hungry for power to be trusted with real authority. Stefano spent the last 8 years quietly proving that assessment wrong to everyone, except the one person whose opinion matters most." Evelyn's mind raced, pieces of the puzzle sliding into place with terrifying clarity. "You think that's why he wants Victor gone?" Sophia's eyes met hers, suddenly very sober, despite the wine. "I didn't say that," she said carefully. "I would never say that out loud in this house." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But if I were you, and I noticed anyone suddenly making plans for a night when 3 rival families were all gathered under one roof, I'd be very, very careful about who I trusted in the days leading up to it." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "Sophia, do you know something? Please, if you know anything." "I know enough to be scared," Sophia interrupted quietly, standing abruptly, some of her earlier looseness evaporating instantly. "And I know enough to understand that being scared and staying quiet is the only reason I'm still breathing in this family." She looked at Evelyn with something that might have been pity or maybe warning. "Be careful, Evelyn. Whatever loyalty you think you owe Victor for saving your brother, don't let it make you stupid. This family eats people who get too close to the truth." "Mami, masama maise." She left without another word, and Evelyn sat alone in the dim library, long after her tea gone cold, Sophia's warning echoing louder in her mind than any threat Stefano himself could have delivered directly. The next morning, Evelyn reported everything to Victor, watching his face carefully as she relayed Sophia's words, searching for some flicker of reaction that might tell her more than his composed expression revealed. "She's not wrong," Victor said finally, his voice heavier than Evelyn had heard it since the night in the hotel room. About any of it. My father did choose me over Stefano's father's wishes for his son. Stefano has spent years proving he deserved it, and years quietly resenting that he still had to prove anything at all. Did you know? Evelyn asked. Before all this happened, did you suspect him? Victor was silent for a long moment, staring out the window of his study at grounds Evelyn had come to associate less with luxury and more with a beautifully disguised cage. I suspected everyone, he admitted finally. That's the nature of this life. You learn not to trust anyone completely, not even family, especially not family. But suspicion and proof are very different things, Evelyn. I've been wrong about people before. I'd rather be wrong about Stefano than destroy him on nothing but instinct. And if you're not wrong, Evelyn asked quietly. Victor's eyes darkened, something cold and final settling behind them. Then he'll learn exactly what happens to people who mistake my patience for weakness. The night of the gala arrived faster than Evelyn felt prepared for the mansion transforming into a flurry of tailored suits and glittering gowns. Security doubled at every entrance, tension so thick in the air it felt like static electricity crawling across her skin. Victor found her just before they were set to leave, dressed in a black gown Marta had insisted on providing. Looking, she suspected nothing at all like the exhausted hotel maid who had stumbled into room 604 less than 2 weeks earlier. You look terrified, Victor observed, studying her carefully. I am terrified, Evelyn said honestly. You're about to walk into a room full of people who might want you dead, and I'm supposed to somehow watch everyone and notice if something's wrong, all while pretending I belong in a dress that costs more than I used to make in 6 months. Something almost gentle passed across Victor's face. You don't have to pretend to belong, he said quietly. Just be exactly what you've been this entire time. Watch, listen, trust your instincts. They've been right about everything so far. That's not exactly comforting, Evelyn muttered. It wasn't meant to be comforting. Victor said, the faintest hint of something like amusement flickering at the corner of his mouth. It was meant to be true. The gala itself was overwhelming in a way Evelyn hadn't fully anticipated. Glittering chandeliers, live music, hundreds of guests whose polished smiles hid decades of violence and rivalry beneath layers of expensive fabric and practiced charm. She stayed close to Victor's side, exactly as instructed, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd, cataloging faces, watching for anything that felt wrong. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. Victor moved through the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging careful pleasantries with rival family heads whose polite smiles never quite reached their calculating eyes. Evelyn watched Stefano do the same across the room, charming, composed, seemingly innocent, and that composure terrified her more than any outburst could have. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Evelyn excused herself to the restroom, weaving through the crowd, her heels aching, her nerves stretched thin from hours of hypervigilance. She was washing her hands when she heard voices drift in from the adjoining lounge, low and urgent, unmistakably Stefano's. The cars already arranged, the routes confirmed. He was saying, his voice tighter than she'd ever heard it. The moment he leaves through the east exit, it happens. No mistakes this time. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She stood frozen at the sink water, still running, straining to hear more. What if he doesn't take the east exit? A second voice asked, a voice Evelyn didn't recognize, low and rough. He will, Stefano said, an edge of impatience creeping into his tone. I've already arranged for the west exit to be blocked for supposed security reasons. He won't have a choice. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she was certain they could hear it through the wall. She shut off the water with trembling hands, forcing herself to breathe, to think, to move. She had to find Victor, now. She burst out of the restroom and nearly collided directly with Sophia, who caught her arm, steadying her, her eyes widening at whatever expression was written across Evelyn's face. What happened? Sophia asked urgently. I need to find Victor. Evelyn gasped. Right now! It's happening tonight! The east exit! Evelyn. Sophia's grip tightened on her arm, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. Listen to me very carefully. If you go running through this ballroom looking panicked, every single person watching is going to notice, and half of them work for families who would love an excuse to think Victor's operation is falling apart from the inside. You cannot panic. Do you understand me? Breathe. Evelyn forced air into her lungs, nodding shakily. Okay, you're right. Where's Victor? Last I saw speaking with the Rossi family near the terrace, Sophia said. Come on, walk, don't run. The two women moved through the crowd as quickly as decorum allowed, Evelyn's entire body vibrating with barely restrained urgency, every second feeling like it might be the second that mattered too late. They found Victor exactly where Sophia had said, deep in conversation with an older man. Evelyn didn't recognize his expression, composed, unaware. Victor? Evelyn's voice came out sharper than intended, drawing his immediate attention. Something in her face must have telegraphed the emergency instantly, because he excused himself from the conversation, without hesitation, stepping close enough that only she and Sophia could hear. What is it? He asked, his voice low, urgent. I heard Stefano, Evelyn breathed. Just now in the lounge by the restrooms. He said the cars arranged, the routes confirmed. He said the moment you leave through the east exit, it happens. He's blocking the west exit on purpose to force you through it. Victor's face went utterly, dangerously still. Tonight, Evelyn confirmed. Victor, we need to leave through a different exit entirely, or not leave at all until we know it's safe, or... No, Victor said, suddenly, something sharp and calculating flashing behind his eyes. No, we're not going to avoid it. Evelyn stared at him, disbelief crashing through her fear. What, Victor, did you not hear what I just said? They're going to kill you the moment you walk out that door. Which means... Victor said, his voice low and dangerously calm, that tonight for the first time we know exactly where and when. That's not a threat, Evelyn. That's an opportunity. An opportunity to get shot, Evelyn snapped, fear making her reckless. An opportunity to catch him in the act, Victor corrected. If we simply avoid the exit, Stefano regroups. He tries again another night, another way, and we're right back to chasing shadows we can't prove exist. But if we let this play out carefully with my own men positioned ahead of time... You're going to use yourself as bait, Evelyn realized, horror dawning across her face. I'm going to use myself as proof, Victor corrected quietly. The only kind that will actually end this, instead of just delaying it. Sophia, who had been listening in tense silence, finally spoke. Victor, this is insane. If something goes wrong, then I trust the people around me to make sure it doesn't... Victor said, his eyes shifting to Evelyn with something steady and unshakable. Reyes is already stationed near the east exit with 3 men in case exactly this kind of plan surfaced tonight. I authorized it before we even left the estate. Evelyn blinked, stunned. You already suspected this. I suspected something, Victor admitted. I didn't know the details until you just gave them to me. Which means everything you just did, walking calmly out of that restroom, instead of panicking, finding me, instead of confronting Stefano directly, giving me the information, instead of trying to solve this yourself, just saved my life for the second time in 2 weeks. The weight of his words settled heavily in Evelyn's chest. Pride and terror tangled together so tightly she couldn't separate one from the other. So what happens now? She asked. Now, Victor said, straightening his expression, sliding back into the composed mask of the man the entire ballroom believed him to be. We finish this evening exactly as planned. Smiles, conversation, nothing out of the ordinary. And when it's time to leave, I walk toward that east exit exactly as Stefano expects me to. Victor, trust me, Victor said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole the rest of her protest right out of her throat. I have not survived 20 years in this life by being careless. Tonight we end this. The remaining hour of the gala felt like the longest of Evelyn's entire life. Every laugh forced, every handshake, watched every second, stretching thin with unbearable tension. She kept her eyes on Stefano from across the room whenever she could, watching him laugh, watching him charm, watching him glance occasionally toward the east exit with a barely perceptible flicker of anticipation that made her stomach twist violently. Finally, just after midnight, Victor announced his departure to his hosts, thanking them warmly for the evening, his composure flawless despite what Evelyn knew was coming. She fell into step beside him as they made their way toward the east exit, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone around them could hear it. Stefano appeared near the door, as if by coincidence, though Evelyn knew it was anything but. Leaving already, Victor? he asked smoothly, his eyes flicking briefly, almost imperceptibly, toward the doors ahead. Long night, Victor said easily. You should head home too, Stefano. Get some rest. I intend to. Stefano said something unreadable, flickering behind his composed smile. Drive safely. The words hung in the air like a curse, disguised as courtesy. Victor and Evelyn stepped out into the cold night air. The estate's cars lined up along the circular driveway, security scattered at careful, practiced intervals. Evelyn's eyes darted instinctively toward the shadows lining the exit route, searching for any sign of Reyes or the men Victor claimed were already in position. They walked toward the car in tense silence, every step feeling impossibly loud in Evelyn's ears, every shadow suddenly sinister, every parked vehicle a potential threat. She could feel Victor's tension radiating beside her despite his outwardly composed stride, and she realized with a jolt that even he wasn't entirely certain how this would unfold. They were perhaps 20 feet from the car when a sharp cracking sound split the night air, and every muscle in Evelyn's body locked in pure animal terror. Someone screamed. Chaos erupted instantly, shouting, running, the unmistakable sound of a second shot ringing out somewhere close, far too close, and Evelyn felt Victor's hand suddenly clamp around her wrist, yanking her violently sideways behind the cover of a parked car as more shouting exploded around them. Victor! Evelyn gasped, her heart in her throat, terror screaming through every nerve in her body. Are you hit? Are you? I'm fine, Victor said, though his voice was tight, adrenaline sharpening every word. Stay down, stay behind me. More shouting, more chaos. And then cutting through it all, a voice Evelyn recognized instantly, Reyes barking orders, and beneath it, another voice, furious, panicked, unmistakably familiar. Stefano's voice. Let go of me. This is insane. I don't know what you're talking about. Let go. Evelyn peered cautiously around the edge of the car and felt her breath catch entirely at the sight unfolding in the driveway. Reyes and two other men had a struggling figure pinned against the side of a black sedan. Not Stefano himself, she realized with dawning horror, but the shooter, a man she didn't recognize, his face contorted with fury and fear as Reyes wrenched a weapon from his grip. And standing several feet away, his face utterly white with shock, was Stefano. You set this up, Victor said, rising slowly from behind the car, his voice deadly calm, despite the chaos still swirling around them, security rushing to secure the scene, guests screaming and fleeing toward their vehicles. You actually went through with it. Victor, I swear to you, I don't know this man. I don't know what's happening. Stefano's voice cracked with something that sounded almost like genuine panic, and for one horrifying second, Evelyn's certainty wavered entirely. Was it possible they were wrong? But then Reyes, still restraining the shooter, called out grimly across the driveway, Boss, you need to see his phone. Victor crossed the distance in 3 long strides, snatching the phone from Reyes's hand, his eyes scanning the screen rapidly, his expression hardening into something cold and absolute. He turned the screen toward Stefano. Care to explain? Victor said quietly, dangerously quiet. Why this man has 17 text messages from your private number over the last 3 days discussing tonight's route in exact detail. Stefano's face drained of every last trace of color. Victor, he stammered. I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. Someone must have... Don't, Victor said, his voice cutting through the night like a blade, final and absolute. Don't insult me with more lies. You've told enough of them already. Evelyn watched frozen as the family she had been living among for 2 terrifying weeks finally cracked wide open in front of her. The mask Stefano had worn so perfectly for years, shattering completely under the weight of undeniable proof. And somewhere beneath her fear, beneath the adrenaline still crashing violently through her veins, a single realization settled with cold, absolute clarity. This wasn't over, not even close, because a man cornered with nothing left to lose was infinitely more dangerous than one still playing a careful, patient game, and the desperate fury burning behind Stefano's eyes in that moment told Evelyn with terrifying certainty that whatever came next would be far worse than anything that had happened before. Reyes dragged the shooter toward a waiting car while Stefano stood frozen in the driveway, his composure completely gone, his hands trembling at his sides in a way Evelyn had never once seen from him. Victor, please. Stefano said, his voice cracking, all traces of his usual smooth confidence stripped away. You have to let me explain. Someone is setting me up. I swear on my father's grave. Don't, Victor said, again quieter this time, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. Don't you dare bring your father into this. The two men stared at each other across the driveway, decades of history compressed into a single unbearable silence. Security still swarming around them, guests still fleeing toward their cars in a chaotic scramble of expensive shoes and panicked voices. Take him inside, Victor finally said to Reyes, not looking away from Stefano. Somewhere private. I want him watched, not touched. Watched. Victor, Stefano tried again. You'll have your chance to explain, Victor said flatly. In private. Not here in front of half the city's underworld with cameras probably already rolling somewhere in that crowd. Two of Victor's men stepped forward and flanked Stefano, not restraining him exactly, but making it clear he had no choice in the matter. Stefano's eyes found Evelyn's for just a moment, as he was led away, and what she saw there chilled her, more than the gunshot had not. Fear exactly, not guilt, but something colder. Calculation, like he was already 3 moves ahead, already planning his next play, even with his mask shattered on the ground behind him. Evelyn realized watching him disappear into the mansion, flanked by armed men, that this wasn't over. Not even close. The car ride back to the estate happened in near total silence, Victor's jaw tight, his hands clenched in his lap, staring out the window at nothing. Evelyn sat beside him, her own hands still trembling slightly from adrenaline that hadn't fully drained from her system. "Are you all right?" she finally asked, her voice small in the quiet of the car. Victor didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low, almost hollow. "I've known Stefano since we were children," he said. "I taught him to ride a bike. I stood beside him at his father's funeral. And tonight I watched him try to have me killed in a room full of witnesses, and part of me still can't fully accept it's real." "The proof was right there," Evelyn said gently. "The messages, the shooter." "I know what I saw," Victor said, cutting her off, though not unkindly. "I'm not questioning the evidence. I'm questioning how I missed it for so long. How many dinners did I sit across from him laughing, trusting him while he was quietly building toward this?" He turned to look at her, finally something raw and exhausted in his eyes. "You saw it faster than I did. A stranger who'd known him for 2 weeks saw what I couldn't see in 8 years. That's not weakness," Evelyn said quietly. "That's just what happens when you love someone. You don't want to believe the worst about them until it's undeniable." Victor studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes that Evelyn couldn't quite name, before he turned back toward the window without responding. Back at the estate, the mansion was a hive of tense, hushed activity. Security doubled at every door. Isabella pacing the main hall with a face like carved stone. Dominic and Sophia huddled together near the staircase, both looking shaken. "Is it true?" Isabella demanded the moment Victor stepped through the door, her sharp eyes flicking briefly to Evelyn before settling back on her nephew. "Stefano tried to have you killed." "It's true," Victor said grimly. Isabella's composure cracked for just a moment, something old and grieving flashing across her face, before she smoothed it back into hardened resolve. "Then it needs to be handled," she said quietly. "Quickly, quietly. Before this fractures the entire family in front of every rival who was at that gala tonight." "I intend to handle it," Victor said. "Personally." "Victor!" Isabella's voice sharpened. "You cannot make this decision emotionally. Whatever history you two share, whatever loyalty you still feel. I said I intend to handle it." Victor repeated, his voice edged with something dangerous enough that even Isabella fell silent. Evelyn watched this entire exchange from a few feet away, feeling once again like an outsider witnessing something enormous and generational, something with roots far deeper than she could fully understand. Sophia caught her eye across the hall and gave the smallest, grimmest shake of her head, a silent warning that made Evelyn's stomach tighten further. Victor disappeared into a private room with Reyes and 2 other trusted men, shortly after leaving Evelyn standing alone in the grand hallway, adrenaline finally crashing hard enough that her knees felt unsteady beneath her. Sophia appeared at her side moments later, guiding her gently toward a nearby sitting room. "You look like you're about to collapse," Sophia said, pouring a glass of water and pressing it into Evelyn's shaking hands. "I think I might..." Evelyn admitted, sinking into a chair. Sophia, I heard him, in the lounge. I heard the whole plan, and I still couldn't quite believe it was actually happening until the gun went off. But it did happen, Sophia said quietly, sitting across from her. And you're the reason Victor's still alive to deal with the aftermath, instead of the family already tearing itself apart over his funeral. She studied Evelyn for a long moment. You know this doesn't end with tonight, right? Stefano's cornered now. Cornered men do desperate things. I know, Evelyn whispered. He's going to look for someone to blame, Sophia continued, her voice dropping lower. Someone he can twist this around onto if he's smart enough to try. And Evelyn, he's very smart. The warning settled into Evelyn's chest like a stone, and she barely slept again that night, every creak of the old mansion sending her heart racing, every shadow beneath her door, making her hold her breath until it passed. 2 days later, everything changed. Evelyn was summoned to Victor's study just after breakfast, and the moment she stepped inside, she knew immediately something was wrong. Victor stood by the window, his back to her, his shoulders rigid in a way she recognized now as barely controlled fury. Reyes stood near the desk, his expression grim, a phone in his hand. Victor, Evelyn asked cautiously, what's happened? Victor turned slowly, and the look on his face made her stomach drop entirely. Stefano's lawyer contacted us this morning, Victor said, his voice tightly controlled. He's claiming the messages found on the shooter's phone were fabricated, planted. He's suggesting someone deliberately framed him to seize control of the family. That's insane, Evelyn said. The evidence was right there. Reyes pulled it directly off the man's phone. There's more, Reyes said grimly, holding up the phone in his hand. Someone leaked a story to a contact of ours this morning, a story claiming Victor's new food taster, a woman with no verified background, no family connections, no ties to organized crime whatsoever, was the one who orchestrated the poisoning at the hotel and the shooting at the gala in an elaborate scheme to eliminate Victor and seize control through manipulation. Evelyn felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. What? That's completely insane. I saved his life. I nearly died right there in that driveway. I know, Victor said quietly. I know it's insane, but Stefano is smart, Evelyn. He's had 2 days to construct a narrative, and he's constructing it well. He's suggesting you infiltrated the hotel deliberately, that the poisoning was staged to gain my trust, that you orchestrated the entire gala shooting to eliminate him as a rival and secure your position at my side. Nobody would believe that, Evelyn said, though even as the words left her mouth, doubt was already creeping in. Some already do, Reyes said grimly. Isabella is asking questions. Dominic's gone quiet, which with him usually means he's taking the safest side rather than the right one. And several of the smaller family alliances are starting to whisper. Evelyn's hands were shaking now, horror and disbelief crashing through her in equal measure. Victor, you know this isn't true. You were there. You know what actually happened. I know, Victor said, his voice softening slightly as he crossed the room toward her. I believe you completely. But belief isn't always enough in this world, Evelyn. Perception matters more than truth sometimes, and Stefano understands that better than almost anyone alive. So what do we do? Evelyn whispered. Before Victor could answer, the study door opened without a knock, and Isabella stepped inside, her face carved from granite, Sophia trailing anxiously behind her. Victor, Isabella said, her voice tight and formal in a way that immediately set Evelyn on edge. We need to discuss the girl. Her name is Evelyn, Victor said sharply. I'm aware of her name, Isabella said coolly. I'm also aware that Stefano's lawyer has produced documents, financial records, apparently suggesting a payment was made to a hotel employee matching her description 3 days before the poisoning occurred. Evelyn's blood ran cold. That's a lie. That never happened. Do you have proof it never happened? Isabella asked, her sharp eyes fixed unblinkingly on Evelyn's face. Bank records, witnesses, anything beyond your word. Evelyn faltered, her mind racing desperately. I don't have bank records because it never happened. There's nothing to prove because there's nothing there, which is precisely the problem, Isabella said, not unkindly, but with brutal clarity. An absence of evidence against you looks identical to evidence carefully hidden. Stefano understands this. He's using it. Isabella, Victor said, a warning edge creeping into his voice. I'm not accusing her, Victor, Isabella said, turning to face him fully. I'm telling you what the rest of this family and every rival watching from outside it is going to see. A stranger appears out of nowhere the same night you're nearly poisoned to death. That same stranger is present again the night Stefano allegedly tries to have you killed. She has no history with this family, no loyalty proven beyond 2 dramatic rescues that conveniently placed her deeper and deeper into your trust. Her voice sharpened. I am not saying I believe Stefano's accusations. I am saying that to anyone watching from the outside, the story writes itself far too easily. The room fell into heavy, suffocating silence. Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes, humiliation and fear tangling together into something that made her chest ache. Victor, she said quietly, you believe me, don't you? Victor turned to her, and for one terrifying second, something flickered across his face that looked almost like hesitation. Of course I believe you, he said finally, though something in his voice sounded strained. Careful, like a man choosing his words with more precision than usual. But Evelyn had learned to read people who didn't want to be read, and what she saw in that half-second of hesitation terrified her more than anything Stefano had done directly. Doubt. Not much. Not enough to change his answer, but enough that she'd seen it flicker across his face before he could hide it away. I need to think, Victor said abruptly, turning back toward the window, his shoulders tense. Reyes dig into every angle of these accusations. I want proof they're fabricated within 24 hours. And Evelyn, Sophia asked quietly the first time she'd spoken since entering the room. Victor was silent for a long, unbearable moment. She stays in her room, he said finally, until this is resolved. Evelyn's stomach dropped entirely. Victor, you're not actually... It's for your protection, Victor said, though he still wasn't looking at her. If accusations are spreading, I need to control the narrative carefully. That means limiting your exposure until we have proof to shut this down completely. That's not protection, Evelyn said, her voice cracking despite her best effort to keep it steady. That's a cage with better lighting. Victor finally turned to look at her, and the exhaustion, the guilt, the impossible weight of everything crashing down on him all at once was written plainly across his face. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I need time to fix this the right way. Evelyn left the study with Sophia's hand gently guiding her by the elbow, humiliation and fear boiling together into something that made her feel sick all the way to her core. She spent the rest of the day locked in her room, staring at walls that suddenly felt less like protection and more like the exact prison she'd feared from her very first night in this house. That evening, Marta brought her dinner on a tray, her expression carefully neutral, though something sympathetic flickered behind her eyes as she set it down. This is ridiculous, Evelyn said, barely touching the food. Marta, you know me. You know I would never... I know, Marta said quietly, glancing toward the door before continuing in a hushed voice. But you need to understand something about this family, dear. Loyalty here is complicated. Even Victor, even with everything he feels for you, has to weigh the survival of an entire empire against the truth of one person's innocence. It's not fair. But it's how this world works. Everything he feels for me, Evelyn repeated slowly, something in Marta's phrasing catching in her chest. Marta's expression flickered, and she quickly busied herself straightening the tray, avoiding Evelyn's eyes. I've said too much already, she murmured. Eat something. You'll need your strength. Evelyn barely slept that night, her mind racing through every possible angle, every piece of evidence Stefano might be fabricating, every way this could unravel completely beyond her control. Around 3 a.m, a soft knock sounded at her door, so quiet she almost missed it. She opened it cautiously to find Sophia standing in the dim hallway, her expression tense and urgent. You need to come with me, Sophia whispered. Now, quietly. What's happening? Evelyn whispered back, fear spiking through her exhausted body. I found something, Sophia said. In Stefano's old study before security locked it down. Something that proves everything. But I need you to see it yourself, because if I bring it to Victor alone, Isabella will say I planted it to protect you. Evelyn's heart pounded as she followed Sophia through the darkened mansion, both women moving silently through hallways that felt infinitely more menacing at 3 a.m. than they had in daylight. Sophia led her to a small, cluttered office on the mansion's third floor, rarely used, filled with old records and dust-covered filing cabinets. "This was my father's old study," Sophia explained quietly, pulling open a drawer. "Nobody comes here anymore. But Stefano used to hide things here when we were kids, back when we still trusted each other enough to share secrets." She pulled out a small, worn ledger, her hands trembling slightly. "I remembered this place existed. I remembered he used to keep things here that he didn't want Victor's father to find." Evelyn's breath caught as Sophia opened the ledger, revealing pages of careful, meticulous handwriting dates, amounts, supplier names that matched exactly what Victor had described about the poison's origin weeks earlier. "This is it," Evelyn breathed. "This is the proof. This shows he's been planning this for years." "There's more," Sophia said grimly, flipping further into the ledger, her face going pale. "Look at this entry from 3 days before the hotel poisoning." Evelyn leaned closer, her eyes scanning the cramped handwriting, and her stomach dropped through the floor entirely. "Payment authorized. E. Carter Hotel staff. Ensure assignment to room 604 tonight." The words swam in front of Evelyn's eyes, horror and confusion crashing through her simultaneously. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. "I never took any payment. I don't understand." "I think," Sophia said slowly, her voice tight with dawning realization, "that Stefano arranged for you to be assigned to that room specifically, not to help you, to use you." Her eyes met Evelyn's wide with horror. He needed someone to walk in and discover Victor dying, someone with no ties to the family, someone innocent enough that Victor would trust her instantly out of gratitude. He needed a hero, Evelyn, to make the story believable enough that Victor would never suspect the poisoning came. "He used me," Evelyn whispered the words, tasting like poison in her own mouth. "From the very beginning. I wasn't an accident. I wasn't luck. I was a piece he moved into place before I ever even knew the game existed. We need to show Victor," Sophia said urgently, closing the ledger carefully. "Tonight, before Stefano finds a way to destroy this too." They moved quickly back through the darkened halls, adrenaline replacing exhaustion, and Evelyn's mind raced through the horrifying implications of what she'd just learned. Every act of kindness Victor had shown her, every protection, every moment of trust. It had all started because Stefano had engineered it, had used her like a chess piece without her ever knowing she was on the board. They found Victor still awake in his study, dark circles under his eyes, papers scattered across his desk. He looked up sharply when they entered, surprise flickering across his face. "It's the middle of the night," Victor said. "What's happened?" Sophia set the ledger on his desk without a word, opening it to the marked page. Victor's eyes scanned the entry, and Evelyn watched the blood drain from his face in real time. "This is his handwriting," Victor said quietly, his voice hollow. "I'd know it anywhere." "He arranged for me to be in that room," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "Before any of this happened. He set me up to save your life so you'd trust me, so the poisoning would look accidental instead of exactly what it was." Victor's hands clenched into fists on the desk. "Everything," he said barely above a whisper. "Every single piece of this from the very first night was his design." "There's something else," Sophia said quietly, and both Victor and Evelyn turned to her. "I overheard staff talking this evening. Stefano met with someone from outside the family 2 hours ago, a man neither of them recognized, but Reyes's men flagged him leaving through the service entrance." Victor's eyes darkened. "The Castellano family," he said slowly. "Or the Rossi, someone from the gala." "You think he's building an alliance," Evelyn said. "I think," Victor said grimly, closing the ledger with a heavy final sound, "that Stefano knows this evidence exists somewhere. He knows time is running out before he loses control of the narrative, which means he's not planning to fight this quietly anymore." As if summoned by the words themselves, a sharp knock echoed at the study door, and Reyes burst in without waiting for permission, his face pale, his breathing ragged. "Boss," he said urgently, "Stefano's gone. His room's empty. 2 of the cars are missing from the garage." Victor was on his feet instantly. "Sometime in the last hour," Reyes said. "Security didn't flag it because he has clearance to move through the estate freely. Nobody thought to stop him." "He knows," Evelyn breathed. "He knows we found the ledger." Victor's jaw tightened, something cold and absolute settling behind his eyes. "Get every available man moving," he said to Reyes. I want the city watched, ports, airports, every safe house he might know about." "And if he's already gone?" Reyes asked. "Then we bring the fight to wherever he's hiding," Victor said, his voice carrying a finality that made the room go silent. The following 2 days stretched into an unbearable blur of tension every hour, bringing new fragments of information Stefano spotted, meeting with Rossi lieutenants, then denied entirely by Rossi's own people. Rumors of a rival alliance forming. Whispers that Stefano was offering pieces of Victor's territory in exchange for support in a war that hadn't officially begun yet, but felt closer with every passing hour. Evelyn barely left Victor's side during this time, no longer confined to her room, her innocence now beyond question, within the walls of the estate, though the accusations Stefano had planted continued, rippling outward into the wider world, whispered among families who hadn't yet heard the full truth. It was on the third night, during a rare quiet moment in Victor's study, that Evelyn finally found the courage to ask the question that had been eating at her since Sophia's revelation. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Trusting me, I mean, knowing now that Stefano orchestrated the whole thing." Victor looked up from the map spread across his desk, his expression softening in a way she hadn't seen from him before. "No," he said simply. "Stefano chose you as a pawn because he assumed anyone would behave the way he would, calculating, self-interested, willing to be bought." He paused, something warm flickering behind his tired eyes. He never accounted for the possibility that the person he selected might actually be exactly what she appeared to be, someone who couldn't watch another person die without trying to help, even at the cost of her own safety. "That's a generous way of calling me predictable," Evelyn said, a small, exhausted smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "It's not predictability," Victor said quietly. "It's integrity. Stefano has spent his entire life surrounded by people who would sell him out for the right price. He couldn't imagine someone who simply wouldn't no matter what was offered. That blind spot is the reason his plan is currently collapsing around him instead of succeeding." Before Evelyn could respond, Reyes appeared at the door, his expression tight with urgency. "Boss, we found him." Victor stood immediately. "Where?" "An old warehouse near the docks," Reyes said. "One of the Rossi family's disused properties. Our contact confirms Stefano's been meeting there for 2 days, and tonight he's meeting with representatives from 3 different families. If this alliance forms, boss, we're looking at war by morning." Victor's face hardened into something Evelyn hadn't seen before, something forged from 20 years of survival in a world that had tried repeatedly to destroy him. "Then we end it tonight," he said, "before morning, before it becomes something none of us can stop." "Victor, that's insane," Evelyn said, fear spiking through her chest. "Walking into a warehouse full of armed men from 3 rival families is exactly what Stefano expects me to be too afraid to do," Victor finished, "which is precisely why I'm going to do it." "Then I'm coming with you," Evelyn said immediately. "Absolutely not," Victor said, turning to face her fully. "Evelyn, this isn't the gala. This isn't controlled security and careful positioning. This is walking directly into the heart of the danger with no guarantee of how it ends. You already tried to protect me by locking me in a room," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "And it didn't stop Stefano's plan from nearly destroying both of us. I'm done being protected from the outside while everything happens without me. I overheard the plan at the gala. I found the connection in that ledger. I've been part of taking him down every step of the way, and I'm not stopping now." Victor studied her for a long, charged moment, something fierce and reluctantly proud moving behind his eyes. "If anything happens to you tonight," he said quietly, "I will never forgive myself." "Then make sure nothing does," Evelyn said. "Together." The warehouse loomed ahead of them just past midnight, Victor's men positioned carefully at every access point, moving with the practiced silence of people who had done this kind of thing before. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs as they approached, every instinct screaming at her that this was insanity, that she should have stayed behind, that walking toward danger voluntarily made no sense at all. But she thought of Daniel recovering safely in a hospital because of the man walking beside her. She thought of every moment since that rainy night in room 604, every choice that had led her here, and she kept walking. Inside, voices carried through the cavernous space. Stefano's voice, unmistakable, addressing a gathered group with the smooth, practiced charm Evelyn remembered from that very first dinner. "A Victor's judgment has been compromised," Stefano was saying, surrounding himself with outsiders, ignoring the counsel of his own family. The woman he's protecting orchestrated an attack on his life, and he refuses to see it because he's too proud to admit he was fooled. "That's an interesting story." Victor's voice rang out suddenly, cutting through the warehouse like a blade, and Evelyn watched from the shadows as every head snapped toward the sound shock, rippling visibly across the gathered men. "Considering I have the ledger proving you arranged the entire poisoning yourself." Stefano's composure cracked instantly, real fear flashing across his face for the first time since Evelyn had known him. "Victor, this isn't what it looks like. You wrote her name yourself," Victor said, stepping fully into view. Evelyn close behind him, Reyes and a dozen armed men fanning out silently around the warehouse's perimeter. "Payment authorized. Evelyn Carter, hotel staff. Insure assignment to room 604. Your handwriting, Stefano. Found in your father's old study, hidden exactly where you used to hide things when we were children, and I trusted you completely." The gathered representatives from the rival families exchanged uneasy glances. The careful alliance Stefano had spent days building visibly crumbling under the weight of undeniable proof. "He's lying," Stefano said, desperately turning to the assembled men. "This is fabricated, planted. He's protecting the woman who tried to kill him." "I saved his life," Evelyn said, stepping forward, despite every instinct telling her to stay hidden, her voice steady and clear across the warehouse. "Twice, while you were arranging for men to poison him and shoot him in a driveway full of witnesses. I have no reason to lie for him. I have every reason to want the truth exposed, because your lies nearly destroyed my entire life alongside his." One of the rival representatives, an older man Evelyn didn't recognize, stepped forward with narrowed eyes. "If this is true," he said slowly, "then you brought us here under false pretenses, Stefano. You asked for our support against a man you claimed was compromised. If instead you're the one who arranged an assassination attempt against your own blood." "It's not true," Stefano insisted, panic finally breaking fully through his composure. "Victor, please, we grew up together. You know I would never—" "I know exactly what you would do," Victor said, his voice quiet now, heavy with genuine grief beneath the anger. "I watched you do it. I have proof of every step. The only thing I don't understand, Stefano, after everything is why. You had everything. Position, respect, family. Why wasn't it ever enough?" Stefano's face contorted, years of buried resentment finally breaking through. "Because it should have been mine," he snarled, all pretense finally abandoned. "My father built this empire alongside yours. I was older, I was smarter, and your father chose you instead, like I was nothing, like I hadn't spent my entire life proving I deserved it more than you ever did. So you decided to take it by force," Victor said quietly. "By poison, by betrayal, by nearly destroying an innocent woman's life to cover your tracks." "I decided to take what should have always been mine," Stefano spat. The warehouse fell into tense electric silence, every man present watching the confrontation unfold, waiting to see which way the balance of power would finally tip. It was the older representative who spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of decades in this world. "We came here tonight believing we were forming an alliance against a compromised leader," he said. "Instead, we've witnessed a confession of attempted murder against family built on the exploitation of an innocent woman. I want no part of this, Stefano. None of the families here will stand behind a man who would do this to his own blood." One by one, the gathered representatives began withdrawing their support, evaporating in real time, leaving Stefano standing alone in the center of the warehouse, his carefully constructed plan collapsing entirely around him. "Victor," Stefano said, his voice suddenly small, desperate in a way Evelyn had never heard from him. "Please, we're family." "You stopped being my family," Victor said quietly, "the moment you decided my death was an acceptable price for your ambition." Reyes stepped forward with two other men moving to restrain Stefano, but he lunged suddenly desperately toward a weapon on a nearby table, and chaos erupted instantly. Evelyn's scream caught in her throat as a shot rang out, but it was Reyes who fired first, striking Stefano's arm before he could raise the weapon, sending him crashing to the ground with a cry of pain and fury. "It's over," Victor said, standing over his cousin, as Reyes secured the weapon and bound his injured arm with rough efficiency. "It's finally over, Stefano." In the aftermath, as authorities arrived to take Stefano into custody for charges that would keep him far from the family's affairs permanently, Victor stood beside Evelyn outside the warehouse, both of them exhausted, adrenaline finally draining from their bodies, leaving something raw and quiet in its place. "You could have died in there," Victor said, turning to face her, fully something fierce and tender warring behind his eyes. "So could you," Evelyn said. "We walked in together. We walked out together. That's how it worked." Victor reached out slowly, almost hesitantly, and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek for a moment longer than necessary. "I spent 20 years believing I could only survive this life by trusting no one completely," he said quietly. "You've spent 2 weeks proving me wrong every single day." "Maybe that's what this world actually needed," Evelyn said softly. "Someone willing to trust, even when everything about it seemed insane." Months passed, and the empire that had once been built on fear and secrecy began slowly, deliberately transforming under Victor's leadership, with Evelyn standing steadily by his side, no longer a maid, no longer a hostage of circumstance, but someone he trusted with every decision that mattered. Illegal operations were dismantled one by one, replaced with legitimate businesses. Charitable foundations were established in the city Evelyn had once served invisibly, and one of the very first initiatives funded the same hospital wing where Daniel had received his surgery, ensuring other families would never face the impossible choices Evelyn once had. On a quiet evening nearly a year after that first rainy night in room 604, Victor knelt before Evelyn in the same hotel suite where everything had begun, the space transformed now warm and light instead of shadowed and dangerous. "You walked into this room believing you were nobody," Victor said, holding a small velvet box in trembling hands. "I want you to walk out of it knowing you're the reason I'm alive to ask you this at all." Evelyn, tears streaming freely down her face, said yes before he even finished the question. The girl who had once been invisible, who had spent her life unnoticed and exhausted, became the woman standing beside the most powerful man in the city, not through violence or manipulation, but through unwavering courage, honesty, and a single act of instinct that refused to let another human being die alone. Daniel, fully recovered, stood proudly beside his sister on her wedding day, living proof of the life Evelyn's bravery had saved twice over. And somewhere in that transformed empire, in every hospital rebuilt and every family helped, the truth remained etched permanently into everything that followed. Sometimes the person the whole world tells you to fear is the very person who ends up saving you. And sometimes one small act of courage is enough to change absolutely everything. 2 years had passed since that wedding day in room 604 and the city. Evelyn Carter, once moved through, invisibly had transformed right alongside the empire that once terrified her. Though few people walking past the gleaming new children's hospital wing downtown ever realized the woman quietly touring its halls each month had once scrubbed toilets for minimum wage 3 blocks away. Evelyn stood at the window of what used to be Victor's private study, now converted into the headquarters of the Morelli Foundation, watching rain streak down the glass in long silver lines that still even now brought her back to that first terrifying night. She touched her stomach absently, still not quite believing the news Dr. Holloway had confirmed only that morning. "You've been standing there for 20 minutes, Victor said from the doorway, his voice warmer now than it had ever been in those early days, softened by 2 years of a life he'd never expected to have. "Marta said you barely touched your lunch." "I was thinking," Evelyn said, turning to face him, unable to fully suppress the smile tugging at her lips. About how strange it is," she said slowly, "that the worst night of my life turned out to be the beginning of the best one." She hesitated, her heart suddenly racing in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Victor, I need to tell you something." Something shifted in his expression instantly, sharp instincts honed by years in a dangerous world reading her tone immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Evelyn said quickly, laughing despite the tears suddenly gathering in her eyes. "Nothing at all. I'm pregnant." For one suspended silent moment, Victor Morelli, a man who had faced down rival crime families, survived poison, and rebuilt an empire from the ashes of betrayal, simply stared at her, utterly speechless. "Say something," Evelyn whispered, nervous laughter bubbling up despite herself. "I don't know what to say," Victor admitted, his voice cracking slightly, something raw and overwhelmed breaking through his usual composure. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled her into his arms so gently, so carefully, as though she might shatter. "Evelyn, are you certain?" "Dr. Holloway confirmed it this morning," she said, her face pressed against his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her ear. That same heart she had once punched back into rhythm on a rainy night neither of them would ever fully stop thinking about. "We're going to have a baby." "A baby," Victor repeated, wonder saturating every syllable, as though the words belonged to someone else's life entirely. News like that in a house like theirs never stayed contained for long. By dinner that evening, Sophia had already burst into their private wing without knocking, practically vibrating with excitement. "Marta told me," Sophia announced, throwing her arms around Evelyn before either of them could react. "I can't believe it. An actual baby. This family desperately needs someone who isn't secretly terrifying." "Your brother is right here?" Victor said dryly, though the corner of his mouth twitched with barely restrained amusement. "I said terrifying, not devastatingly handsome," Sophia shot back, earning a genuine laugh from Victor that still, even now, made Evelyn's chest swell with quiet pride at how far he'd come from the guarded, wounded man she'd first met, choking for breath in a hotel armchair. "Isabella." When she heard said very little, but Evelyn caught her wiping her eyes discreetly in the hallway later that evening, and when their gazes met, the older woman simply nodded once, a gesture that had come to mean more between them over the past 2 years than any words ever could. Isabella had been slow to trust Evelyn brutally honest in those early days about how the family and the world would perceive her, but slowly, deliberately. That honesty had transformed into something resembling genuine respect, and now something even warmer than that. Daniel. When Evelyn called him that night, nearly dropped the phone in his excitement. "An uncle," he said, his voice cracking with emotion that had nothing to do with his fully healed heart and everything to do with the family he'd once feared he might lose entirely. "Evie, I'm going to be an uncle." "You're going to spoil this child rotten, aren't you?" Evelyn said, laughing through sudden tears. "Absolutely," Daniel confirmed without hesitation. "It's basically my only job now that you don't need me picking up extra shifts to help with rent anymore." The mention of those old, exhausting days, 19-hour shifts, hospital bills stacked in drawers, a life measured in survival rather than living, still occasionally caught Evelyn off guard, a phantom ache from a version of herself that felt impossibly distant now, and yet was never quite forgotten. She had insisted over Victor's gentle protests on maintaining her own small charitable initiative, separate from the larger foundation, a program specifically designed to identify hotel and hospitality workers facing medical emergencies for their families, providing anonymous emergency funding before situations became desperate enough to require someone else's rainy night miracle. "You didn't have to build something named after yourself," Victor had told her once, reviewing the foundation's paperwork. "I didn't name it after myself," Evelyn had corrected, pointing to the modest plaque that simply read, "The 15 Minutes Fund," a quiet reference only she and Victor would ever fully understand, the 15 minutes Rosa had begged her to spare that rainy night, the 15 minutes that changed everything. Life inside the estate, once suffocating with danger and suspicion, had slowly transformed into something Evelyn had never dared imagine for herself, not quite ordinary given who her husband was and the complicated world he still carefully managed, but stable in a way that felt like an entirely different kind of miracle. The legitimate businesses Victor had built from the empire's ashes were thriving, drawing respect from circles that once would have dismissed the Morelli name entirely. The old criminal connections had been severed carefully and permanently in the 18 months following Stefano's arrest, with Victor personally ensuring that nothing remained that could threaten the family or the child now growing inside his wife, the way it once had threatened them both. Stefano himself remained in custody, his trial delayed repeatedly by legal maneuvering that Victor no longer bothered following closely. Sophia visited him once, 6 months after his arrest, against Victor's wishes, returning pale and shaken, but resolute. "He asked about you," she told Evelyn quietly that evening, unable to meet her eyes. "He wanted to know if you were happy." "What did you tell him?" Evelyn had asked. "I told him you were the happiest person in this entire family," Sophia said, "because it's true, and because some small stupid part of me still wanted him to know that whatever he tried to destroy, it grew into something more beautiful than he ever could have imagined instead." Evelyn hadn't visited him. She doubted she ever would, but she found to her own quiet surprise that she no longer carried hatred for him the way she once expected to. Only a strange, distant pity for a man so consumed by resentment that he'd been willing to destroy everyone around him, including himself, chasing a version of power that had never actually been about happiness at all. 7 months into her pregnancy, on an evening thick with the particular restlessness of late pregnancy, Evelyn found herself back in room 604, not by accident this time, but by quiet choice. Victor had suggested keeping the suite exactly as it was transformed from a place of near death into something closer to a shrine of gratitude, and they returned there occasionally together when the weight of the world outside felt like too much. "Do you ever think about that night?" Evelyn asked, resting against Victor's shoulder, as rain once again streaked the same windows that had witnessed everything begin. "Every single day," Victor admitted quietly. "I think about how close I came to dying alone in that chair with nobody in the world to even notice until it was far too late." He pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "And then I think about how, instead, a stranger who had every reason to walk away chose to save me. And somehow, that single decision rewrote the rest of both our lives." "I almost didn't come in," Evelyn admitted softly. "I almost turned around at the door. If Rosa hadn't pushed me, if I hadn't been desperate enough for that 15 minutes of overtime, then I would have died that night," Victor said simply, no drama in his voice, only quiet, devastating truth. "And Stefano would have taken everything, and this family, this business, this entire city would look completely different right now." He turned to face her fully, his hand resting gently against the curve of her stomach. "Sometimes I think about how much of the world rests on moments like that. Small, seemingly insignificant choices that turn out to be the hinge everything else swings on." "That's a lot of pressure to put on one exhausted maid working a double shift," Evelyn said, laughing softly through sudden tears. "You were never just an exhausted maid," Victor said, his voice fierce with quiet conviction. "You were the bravest person in that entire hotel, and you didn't even know it yet." Their daughter was born on a bright, unremarkable Tuesday morning in early spring. Nothing dramatic or dangerous about her arrival at all, which felt to Evelyn like its own kind of miracle after everything that had come before. They named her Rosa, after the tired, frightened supervisor who had begged Evelyn to take that assignment in the first place, the woman whose desperate 15-minute favor had unknowingly set in motion the rescue of an empire. Rosa herself, still working at the Ashford Grand years later, wept openly when Evelyn brought the baby to visit, completely overwhelmed to learn a child bore her name. "I nearly lost my job forcing you to do that room," Rosa said, cradling the infant carefully, still shaking her head in disbelief at the strange, impossible turns life could take. "I've thought about that night more times than you could imagine, wondering what would have happened if I'd sent someone else instead." "Then we should both be grateful you didn't," Evelyn said warmly, squeezing the older woman's hand. Daniel, now 20 years old and thriving, fully recovered, and pursuing a degree in nursing specifically because of the care he'd received during his own health crisis, became an instant and devoted uncle, visiting so often that Rosa's first clearly spoken word, much to Victor's mock outrage, was uncle before it was ever daddy. "This is a conspiracy," Victor grumbled good-naturedly, watching his daughter reach eagerly for Daniel the moment he walked through the door. "She has excellent taste," Daniel said, scooping his niece into his arms with practiced ease. Some of us are just naturally more fun than terrifying mafia bosses turned legitimate business tycoons. Former mafia boss, Victor corrected dryly. I believe the Foundation Gala last month referred to me as a respected philanthropist. The Foundation Gala also hadn't seen you threaten a caterer over undercooked salmon, Sophia called from across the room, earning laughter from everyone present. Even Isabella, whose sharp features had softened considerably over the years into something resembling genuine, unguarded warmth whenever her family gathered together like this. It was nearly 3 years to the day since that rainy night in room 604, when Evelyn stood once again at the window of Victor's study, now cradling their second child, a son they'd named after Victor's father, watching the city lights flicker on as evening settled gently over everything below. "Regrets?" Victor asked, coming to stand beside her, resting his hand gently against their son's small back. "Not one," Evelyn said honestly. "Terror sometimes remembering how close we came to losing everything. Gratitude mostly for every impossible turn that led us here." She looked up at him, this man who had once been the most feared name in the city, now simply the father of her children, the partner who had rebuilt not just an empire but an entire life alongside her. "What about you? Any regrets?" Victor considered this question seriously, the way he considered everything. Now no longer the guarded, calculating man who trusted no one completely, but someone who had learned through her that vulnerability wasn't weakness at all. "Only one," he said finally, "that it took nearly dying to finally see what mattered." "Better late than never," Evelyn said softly. "Better," Victor agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "Because of you." Outside, the city hummed with the same restless energy it always had, thousands of people moving through their own invisible struggles, their own quiet acts of courage that would never make headlines or change empires the way Evelyn's single instinctive punch had changed hers. But somewhere in that vast, indifferent city, the 15 Minutes Fund quietly continued its work, finding exhausted, invisible people just like she had once been, offering them the kind of unexpected rescue she herself had never dared to hope for. Because that, in the end, was the truth. Evelyn Carter had learned more deeply than any other lesson from everything she'd survived that the world rarely announces its most important moments in advance. They arrive disguised as ordinary nights, forgettable assignments, 15-minute favors nobody wants to do. They hide inside choices that feel insignificant in the moment they're made, revealing their true weight only in hindsight, once the ripples have already spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. A poor maid had walked into a dying man's room expecting nothing more than another exhausting task at the end of an exhausting shift. She had left having rewritten the future of an entire empire, having discovered a courage inside herself she never knew existed, having found love in the most unlikely, most dangerous place imaginable. And somewhere in that transformation from invisible to essential, from frightened to fearless, from a woman surviving paycheck to paycheck to a woman standing at the center of a family finally healed, lived the simplest, most enduring truth of the entire story. Sometimes the smallest act of instinct born from nothing more than the refusal to let another human being suffer alone becomes the single thread that unravels an empire of lies and weaves in its place an entirely new and unbreakable kind of home. And sometimes against every impossible odd stacked in front of her, the invisible girl becomes exactly the kind of woman the whole world remembers.